In times like these, we need faith that's victorious, and you can walk in it. Welcome to Victorious Faith with Pastor Mark Cowart.
Hello and welcome to the broadcast. It is good to have you with us today. We've been blessed this week to have our good friend Fred Markert. Fred, it's always a blessing to be together. And I think you are a gift to the body of Christ in the sense of how you think strategically. You're so out of the box of the mainstream of Christianity, and we've been in the wrong box. We've kept things in a sphere that it needs to get out of, and we're going to talk about the strategic nature of missions today, because that's one of the things that impacted me on one of the first times. We were trying to figure out how long we've known each other. And we know it was prior to the CD.
Yes.
And cassette tapes were the happening thing.
Tapes.
And the first time I heard you, I wanted to get every message you had available. But the one thing that really impacted me was being strategic. And, we've been blessed here at CFAN. The Lord opens doors for us. We believe at CFAN, and I've said this numerous times, everything God does is through relationships. Right. So I always look for relationships, and I believe you're one of those, obviously. Right. And we have a relationship into Uganda with Bishop Joshua Laweri, and he has been a great encouragement because when he looks at America, he sees it through a biblical lens. And he said, Mark, it's easy for you guys if you'll get back to the Word, but they've proven it. And in 1962, they declared independence, or they were, independent from Great Britain. But the problem was they dedicated the entire nation to witchcraft. There was bloodletting and human sacrifice. And in that stream was Milton Obote and Idi Amin and Joseph Kony. And George Otis Jr. did the documentary Unconventional War. And the reason I bring it up, because we're really involved there. And it just has blown me away that discussions you've had about strategic ways to reach nations and see the culture change we're involved in, and yet I'm learning. So you told me something one time, and it just shocked me. You said Uganda is one of the 7 most strategic mission fields in the world. Well, now they've got this, a great influence of Christianity, and they have so many things that have turned. How in the world is Uganda one of the most strategic mission fields in the world, like the top 7?
Right. Well, Pastor Mark, being strategic is important because there are 3.36 billion people without the gospel. So we have to go after completing the Great Commission in a way that gives us the maximum return for our work, our prayer, our money. And so of the 7,338 unreached people groups, which is 3.36 billion people, there are 127 groups that have influence over all the others. So Paul talked about when you get to a city, find the man of peace, right, that has influence. You win the influential group, and then they impact all the other groups beneath them that relate to them and look up to them. And so there are 7 strategic areas where these 127 groups are, and one of them runs right across those areas right across that belt of Africa where Uganda is, where Islam meets Christianity. And what the Muslims have been doing is they've been pushing south into Christian Uganda. Right now, Winston Churchill said Uganda is the jewel of Africa, right? It's a massively important country strategically. And the Muslims are coming south. The government hasn't provided schools for all the villages. So the Muslims come into a village from just north of Uganda. They plant a school. And so all the parents send their kids to the school and they're getting trained in Islam. All the parents go to PTA meetings. They're getting dosed with Islam and they're thinking, wow, look what the Muslims are doing for us. And they're starting convert Christianized Uganda into Muslim Uganda, village at a time. So what we have to do is stop the southern spread of Islam. And you mentioned it in the last video. The student volunteer movement missionaries in Southern Africa, when they saw the southern spread of Islam, they said, we have got to stop that, so we need to draw a line in the sand. And they planted mission stations 24 hours apart all along that line that goes through Uganda. And they said, we wanted 24 hours apart, so with one-day travel we could get to other Christians for fellowship. But they packed their clothes in coffins, their children's clothes in children's coffins, baby clothes in babies' coffins, because they said, we will get martyred establishing this line to stop the southern spread of Islam, right? And they did. They were, most were martyred to stop the southern spread of Islam. And now Islam is spreading south again. So Uganda, which is Christianized for the most part, we need to preserve that. We need to not let Islam come there, and we need to use it as a launching pad to preach the gospel into Muslim Northern Africa. So it's a twofold thing: stop the southern spread, preserve the faith, and strengthen it to be a launching pad up into Muslim Northern Africa, right? Just like we launch airplanes from aircraft carriers, you need a launching pad like that. So Uganda's critical. And I believe you guys are involved. Aren't you involved with doing schools in Uganda?
Very involved. And when I went over this last trip, we went up to a village near the Tanzanian border, and Idi Amin had come in and devastated brought Tanzanian troops in and virtually razed all the buildings. And then the second wave of destruction was AIDS. And so you have all these parents that were wiped out. And I'm learning all this through our friend Bishop Joshua Lowery. And so you had elderly grandparents raising these kids, or young kids raising their siblings. So he takes me to a village there where since that time bought 11 acres. COVID completely almost devastated. So when I went over there, we built a building and the church just responded incredibly for teachers. So we brought teachers in. We had 187 students. Wow. Then we just got an email, it's 235 students. Then we have a pastor that says, I've got 100 students to bring, and so we need to expand the dormitories. And I found out there is so much witchcraft out there, and it is so desolate. I've been down there a couple of times. So when you shared these things, it made my heart leap, because, you know, if we'll present ourselves, Fred, to the Lord, He'll lead us and guide us. And then you were like a confirming voice. And there's a whole lot of other things that we're partnering with on that. But these are things that I would have never known if I hadn't heard you sharing. But what you're saying, it's more than just that community. This is a strategic launch.
Absolutely. You know, 80% of war is logistics, not the actual fighting. That's how you win. And so particularly in logistics, you need launching platforms, you know, to gather the troops. So why Uganda is so critical is it was won by those student volunteers who moved north, packing their clothes in coffins. That's what won Uganda down south to be Christianized. And so you see the problems up north that you talked about with witchcraft, Islam coming down. And so we've got to honor the sacrifice of our ancestors, preserve what they won, strengthen the gospel there so that we can use it to launch an offensive, not in a negative sense, launch missionary teams into Muslim Northern Africa. Because you need those launching pads.
I'll never visit there again the same, knowing, having revisited what the volunteer student movement did. But this is the problem with America. I know of a pastor refused to go on a missions trip because there were no 5-star hotels there.
Yes.
And it grieves me because I think these people went, packed their clothes and their children's clothes in coffins.
Right.
And so if we'll get back to that mentality,
Right.
but where we're at in the world, Fred, and you talked about polarity.
Yes.
In this unipolar, bipolar, multipolar world. And you basically, what I have picked up in our recent conversations is what it's going to take to keep this complete societal collapse from America from happening is a true move of God.
Yes.
Right out of Acts chapter 2. But explain this polarity thing
Right.
in the world.
So, Pastor Mark, of course, God created a universe. That's diversity and unity. That's where those two words come together, unity and diversity, universe. So when he created the 7 spheres, the 7 mountains, government, family, education, economics, right? He designed them all to work together. We only focus on the sphere of religion, the church, the Bible, what the prophets are saying, and we ignore mostly what's happening in the other 6 spheres, but they're all integrated. What happens in politics affects the church. What happens in the economy affects the church. What happens in the family affects the church, right? The church isn't impervious to what's going on in the other 6 spheres around us. That's why in Chronicles, it says the sons of Issachar understood the times, and because they understood the times, they knew what Israel should do. So they understood what was happening with their enemies, with the economy, with everything, so they knew how to respond. Jesus said it. He said, you know how to interpret the weather. How is it you don't know how to interpret this present time? So we've got to learn to read geopolitics, read the economy, read what's happening in society, like we read the Bible. Now, the Bible is our standard. It's infallible, and that is our rock. But what's happening in these realms affect the church. So what happened? Why did we see such great breakthrough in the 90s, the 82,000 movement, this greatest harvest ever, is because geopolitically, government is one of the 7 mountains, international government. Geopolitically, communism collapsed, okay? And America became the sole superpower. And so let me go into international relations terms to explain this. There's a cycle that happens. Everything in the world happens in cycles. It's what Solomon said, what has been done will be done again, etc. So it's in cycles. And in Daniel 2, God says, I'm the God who raises up kings. I'm the God who tears down kings. There's a cycle that God uses to raise up countries and tear down countries. And it's happened all throughout 5,000 years of recorded history. So here's the basic idea. Just like there are some good people and bad people, we have policemen to arrest the bad people who murder and steal, so that the majority of people can receive the blessing of God, right? God wants to bless us, through us bless the nations. So the police force suppresses the bad people so we can live in peace, safety, security, prosperity. Okay? In the same way, countries, there are some good countries and some bad countries, some that help the world, some that hurt the world. So God has to raise up a country that's the global policeman to suppress the bad boy countries so the whole world can live in peace, safety, security, and prosperity. So we've got a process to do that. It starts with what they would call a multipolar world. Think of a pole like that is holding up a roof. It's the center of power. So in a multipolar world, this is how God sorts out the countries to find out which country I can use to be the global policeman at any time in history. So God has to suppress the bad boy countries. So in this process, a multipolar world, you have 3 or more countries of roughly equal military power. And in that multipolar season, you have war. Great power war, that's what it's called. We call it world war. They fight each other for control of the world. Through those wars, Some of them lose their power, and you have only 2 countries left standing. The world goes bipolar, not the kind where you need Xanax or whatever that is. It means 2 powers in the world. That's a better world. They're fighting, but it's better than multipolar where the wars are huge, right? And then eventually one of them loses power, and you go unipolar, where there's one superpower that's on top. Eventually, that superpower becomes decadent, it decays, it becomes immoral, they collapse. The world goes back to multipolar, bipolar, unipolar, multipolar, bipolar, unipolar. This has happened in recorded history, 5,000 years. It's happened 26 times. We're now in the 27th iteration of that cycle. And it was right there in the early 1990s at the collapse of communism. Okay, to put it in terms, the colonial period, you had all the European powers fighting that multipolar, right? Then the world went bipolar. All of them lost their power, but Britain and France, that was the bipolar world.
Okay.
Then at Waterloo, France lost. Britain became the unipolar power, and we had the peace of Britain for 100 years. In a unipolar season, there's no world war. Small regional wars, but no world war. Why is that good? Because instead of everyone putting money in tanks and airplanes and bullets and rifles, they put it in libraries and schools and hospitals and development. So the world develops under unipolar power, but also the gospel is free to go forth globally with no hindrance. Because guess what you can't do when there's world war? You can't put missionaries in airplanes and send them around the world because you're in world war. You just don't go, you don't send tourists, you don't send missionaries. And I'll show a graph of that. So in a multipolar world, you had the colonial powers, multipolar, then Britain and France, bipolar, then Britain, unipolar, from 1815 to 1914. And in 1914, Britain, because it started out as moral, Queen Victoria was a Christian. She said, God gave us this superpower status to preach the gospel and disciple the nations, not to make money. And she held firm for about halfway through, for about 50 years, and then the economic interests were so big in the East India Trading Company, everything and they prevailed upon her, and she issued a proclamation in 1857. She said, we no longer have the desire to share our religious conviction with our subjects in the colonies. And it shifted from discipling the nations and planning schools and hospitals and things like that in India to commerce. How do we make money in India? And so Britain peaked and that's blessed to be a blessing to all the nations. Their blessing started to wane, collapsed in 1914. Unipolar, when the unipolar power collapses, you go multipolar. And when you go to a multipolar world, you have World War. And so World War I started.
There it is.
Because you had Japan rising up, Germany, Russia, and also America too rose up, right? And so that's a multipolar world. And we had 31 years of a multipolar world. World War I, the Great Depression, World War II.
So Fred, in those 5,000 years, that's the cycle.
Over and over. There's nothing new under the sun. It repeats.
So, and that's biblical. That's what Solomon said.
Solomon said it.
Basically, what you're saying is we're now about to come
Yes.
into another cycle, which means what? What transpired?
End of World War II, we went bipolar. USA, USSR. And so we were bipolar from 45 to 1989.
That's amazing.
And so what happened? The USSR collapsed, and then unipolar. America became the unipolar power, right? What happens over time is the unipolar power becomes immoral. God says, you're the global policeman, suppress the bad boys. While we were the sole superpower, China didn't dare persecute Christians to the degree they are now. As our power is waning, they're persecuting the Muslims in the camps out in the West. They're persecuting the church more. India is kicked out missionaries and is persecuting Christians more, because when there's that sole superpower who's the global policeman, countries are on their best behavior about human rights and everything. But what's happened in America, we've become so immoral that we are losing our unipolar status, our sole superpower status. We've seen the rise of 4 countries especially, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, who formed an alliance. They said we are going to take down America. And the fact they use the terms, they say we hate this unipolar world because America has imposed a global order. It's called the rules-based order, the rule of international law. It's biblically based international law. So all trade, everything happens according to like Judeo-Christian principles. They say we hate that. We're going to go to a multipolar world by tearing down the unipolar power. Now here's the challenge in all of history. When the unipolar power collapses, when you cross into a multipolar world, you get World War. That's why we can very confidently predict we will have World War III before the end of this decade, because America is losing its unipolar status.
This is just really like what Jesus said. How is it you can predict the weather, but you don't? And I'm sitting here listening to you, and really you're just forecasting basically the way that we predict weather and stuff. And unless we have a divine intervention,
Absolutely.
This is going to happen.
Because the key, God is the one who raises up nations and tears them down. He raises up the unipolar power, tears it down, right? Why? How does that happen? Proverbs 14. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any nation, right? So when we're righteous, he rises us up, and we've been a righteous country in the sense we've Christianized, the largest mission sending country on earth, family strong, morality strong, everything strong. We've done more for charity, helping the world in every way to develop educationally, food, etc., more than any other country in history, but that's all stopped. And we've gone decadent, immoral, sinful. Our movies are immoral. Instead of exporting healthy movies like we used to have that were family-centered and instill good values, the movies we grew up on.
Absolutely.
Now our movies are full of immorality, and we are exporting immorality to the entire planet, even to more traditional societies that have maintained their values. We're exporting our movies that glorify adultery and sex outside of marriage and drugs and all sorts of things. And God is saying, God has basically said to America, mene, mene, tekel, upharsin, like the Daniel, you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting because of our immorality. We're losing our status. People don't know how close we are. They think we're still strong. We're not. Some of our presidents in recent past have purposely weakened our military. In fact, I can say it, I'll say it because they just said it publicly. Obama declared, and both parties I think are corrupt. I believe that there's very little hope in politics. We need Jesus. But Obama purposely weakened the military, and Biden, when he was vice president under Obama, in his speech in Ukraine in 2009 said, our goal is to produce a multipolar world. That was the goal. Obama had the military, I have the document rise up, it said, the unipolar moment planning America's retreat from preeminence.
This is all hidden in plain
It's hidden,
sight.
but I have the documents, they'll be in the video, that show this. And so what China and Russia signed in February 4th of last year, they signed an agreement. They said, we're going to be in partnership to create a multipolar world because we want to see the destruction of the unipolar world order. And then 20 days later, the invasion of Ukraine. That's what Ukraine is about, and Putin says it in his speeches. We want to destroy the unipolar world, and then we want to usher in a multipolar world where we're on top, Russia, China, Iran. And the RAND Corporation, who does all the war games and measures every country's strength in the world, they're the official ones that say the rank order of your strength. Last year, for the first time, because of the weakness in our military, because our military is now training in gender issues and stuff rather than, we've even lost military discipline in many ways. Rand said last year for the first time, America cannot win a war with any two of those four. We cannot win. Of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, any two gang up, we can't win. If it's either Russia or China that we go to war with, we only have a 50% chance of winning. So we're on the verge of collapse of America as the sole superpower and a unipolar power. And we can talk about what that's meant for the kingdom when we get to our next session, because there's an important truth there. We need to see revival in America to stop our moral slide, to maintain our unipolar status, so that the gospel can go forth with great power throughout the world.
Wow. You know, Fred, and we are at the end of the broadcast, and so we'll finish this week out with what can we do, because this is what I appreciate about you. You lay it out there, and it's so simple when you break it down like you've broken it down. And we have no excuse in America because of our foundations.
Right.
Our founders said religion and morality are the pillars of society. And we've allowed this. You know, we talked about Eric Metaxas' book, Letter to the American Church. This was shocking, but I agree with him. He said we're worse than Nazi Germany, because Nazi Germany had no one to look back at and say, ooh, we better not do that. We can look at them and see what happened there. But we'll pick up where we left off tomorrow, and we're going to talk about what we can do right now, not something off in the distant future, something we actually must have. So I want to encourage you, if you'd like to get all these broadcasts, they're available. The information's on your screen. Be sure to visit my website, and there's a lot of great resources on there. We've had such special guests, and Fred, this is a highlight for me. This is the stuff as a pastor, and if you know pastors, you need to share this information with them if you can. Also, if you're not watching on YouTube, I encourage you to visit my YouTube channel, share that with others. And then also, if you need prayer for anything, we've got people standing by right now, and the number's on your screen. I hope you'll call and let us agree with you and pray with you. And don't miss tomorrow's broadcast. We're gonna land on some solutions and powerful things, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow at this same time.
Some are called to go, and some are called to send, but everyone is called. Learn what Jesus meant in his sermons about the Great Commission and how you can get involved. Order this teaching today at markcowart.org or by calling 1-800-590-4764.
Thank you for watching the Victorious Faith broadcast. I want to invite you, if you're in the Colorado Springs area, would you join us for a Sunday service at Church for All Nations? So we want to invite you to one of our services at 9 or 11 a.m. You can also be a part of services online, and you can check out all of our kids ministry episodes on the CFAN app.
Join us again next time on Victorious Faith with Pastor Mark Cowart.